Welcome to the Voices for Voices podcast, sponsored by Redwood Living. Thank you for joining us today. I am Justin Allen Hayes, founder and executive director of Voices for Voices, host and humanitarian. You can learn more about Voices for Voices on our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel at Voices for Voices, and also on our website, voicesforvoices.org. Voices for Voices is a 501c3 nonprofit charity organization that survives solely on donations. So if you are able to, please consider heading over to voicesforvoices.org to help us continue our mission and the goal and dream to help 3 billion people over the course of my lifetime and beyond. Or you can also send a donation to the mailing address of Voices for Voices at 2388 Beckett Circle, Stowe, Ohio 44224, or through the Cash App at Voices for Voices. Are you or somebody you know looking for a volunteer opportunity? If so, please reach out to us today via email at president@voicesforvoices.org. Now, I founded Voices for Voices to provide a platform for folks to share their stories with others as we work to break the stigma around mental health, accessibility, and disabilities, helping people get the help they need while also helping them prepare and/or transition into the workforce with the Voices for Voices Career Center, where we connect talent with opportunity for both job seekers and employers alike, from coast to coast and in every industry and job level. And who can forget about merchandise? The Voices for Voices merchandise shop is finally up and running at voicesforvoices.org/shop, where shipping is always free, and again, all donations are 100% tax deductible. Today's guest is an American Board certified art therapist, a licensed psychologist, and PhD in counseling psychology, with over 50 years of experience working in private practice. She has taught courses spanning the world, including in the United States of America at the Pittsburgh Psychoanalytic Institute and the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Psychiatry. She has also written many articles, books, lectures, and films, including books titled The Art of Art Therapy and Approaches to Art Therapy, and also films titled Art Therapy Has Many Faces, which is now subtitled in at least 14 languages, and A Universal Language for Healing. Today's guest, Dr. Judy Rubin, is an honorary life member of the American Art Therapy Association, and also may be recognized as the art lady from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood television show with Fred Rogers. And she is also the co-founder and president of the nonprofit educational organization, Expressive Media, Inc. Please join me in welcoming to the show today, Dr. Judy Rubin. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. So your name was how I how I learned more about you. One of our board members, Heidi LaRue, she is a supervising art therapist, and she was speaking one day about heroes of hers that she looked up to throughout her career. And your name came up, and we spoke about it and thought it would be a great idea, at least to reach out, because we know everybody's busy, and we weren't sure if it would be possible to have you join us for an episode. But when submitted the request on your website and got your feedback, was just absolutely thrilled to have you come and share your story and experiences with our audience, which is a television audience on our Hudson Community Television all of the audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart, and as well as we do the transcripts. So people, if that's how they process information, and if they have other challenges, that they can read through the transcript. And then art therapy for me started when I had a 5-day inpatient stay at our a local hospital here at the Akron General Medical Center. And before that, while also talking about the mental health issues and challenges I have, the art side of things, I knew in my first 35 years of life, I wasn't a good artist, and I equated art to having to be good at something, to be recognized, for people to say you're good at art. And so I never thought of myself as an artist or somebody who liked to do art. But I also recognized that I like to play music and play guitar. And once I learned that that is a form of art and a form of expression, and seeing that singing earlier in your career, kind of starting out, you integrated that with your practice, things started to really click in place. So I just want to thank you for everything you've done in the art therapy, the mental health space over your career. It's to be able to speak to somebody that was at the forefront of some of the methods that I experienced is awesome. So I just want to thank you for that.
It's been a great pleasure throughout.
Absolutely. First, I just want to maybe cover about when you were earlier in your career and you decided that you didn't like writing lesson plans and paddling and those things in the classroom. It may have been thought of as an outsider, or like, okay, well, what is she doing? What is her strategy? How did that mindset come into play of your philosophy with as it related to art?
That's an interesting question. It is true that I would have been fired from the Cambridge Public Schools, where I was an art teacher. And because I didn't want to use the stencils that they wanted me to use with the children, I thought it was not my idea of creativity. Fortunately, we were moving to Pittsburgh, and I had already submitted my resignation, so they didn't have to fire me. In Pittsburgh, you mentioned the paddle. That was one of the issues that got me in trouble. I was called into the principal's office, and she said, I understand that you're not using the paddle. And this is a wooden paddle. This is 1959, a long time ago. And at that time, a wooden paddle was actually in every classroom in the public schools of Pittsburgh. And I said, well, I haven't needed to. And she said, well, you're undermining the discipline of the other teachers. And I thought, well, I obviously don't fit in this place. The children loved art, without question. Children always do. So it was a good time to decide to start a family, which I did. And though I met Fred Rogers actually through the person who invited me to do art therapy, which I wasn't trained for. Okay. And nobody was trained in 1963. So it's actually, excuse me, 60 years that I've been at. The woman who was Fred's mentor throughout his career until her death, Margaret McFarland, invited me to work at the place where he was working and studying, and which was run by the Child Development Department of the University of Pittsburgh, which happened to be in the Department of Psychiatry, which is pretty rare. Yeah. And I was asked to work with the school-age children in art, not so much teaching as providing a space for them to find themselves. And she said, would you like to do art therapy with the children in the hospital? And I said, oh, I don't have any training. I'm not a therapist. And she said, well, I will supervise you. And she was a clinical child psychologist. And I thought, oh, well, okay. It sounded interesting. And I really fell in love with it because, as, as I mentioned, I didn't fit so well into public school teaching at any rate in the late 50s, but also um, working with these children who were diagnosed schizophrenic
Mm-hmm.
was really challenging, really challenging. Many of them didn't have language, or if they did, it was very hard to understand. They had many physiological, orthopedic, and other challenges besides their mental health condition. Um, so I was fortunate that I could work with each one individually and kind of feel my way. And I read everything that was written, which wasn't a great deal at that point, about art therapy. But in that sense, I was very lucky um, because there was something really neat about being able to make it up as you went along to discover in collaboration with the children what was possible. And so that became extremely exciting, fulfilling, and I decided that's what I wanted to do.
Great. Do you think, kind of at that early stage of your career, that the restrictions or I'll say, yeah, the restrictions in public school could have been holding back some individuals who had that interest in art and art therapy, and that could have been a roadblock to some?
Well, it was a different era. The school in Cambridge, Massachusetts was different from the school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were in different kinds of neighborhoods, but children are children. And I don't know that I would say the school was holding people back, but in the sense that the expectations were codified, they were somewhat rigid. The curriculum was spelled out, and part of my problem was that I added things. I didn't not follow the curriculum, but I did add things that weren't in the curriculum, and I was criticized for that too. Um, one of the things I added, I remember, was slides of artwork, um, which is how I had learned about art myself. Slides of famous artists, showing them to the children, and my supervisor, who incidentally was Andy Warhol's supervisor.
Oh, wow.
He was his teacher in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. Very nice guy, but kind of rigid. He came in and he saw me showing the kids some slides. He said, "That's not in the lesson, in the curriculum. Why are you doing it?" And the other crime I recall was that he said I shouldn't be wearing flat shoes. I should be wearing high heels.
Oh.
Teachers had to wear dresses and high heels, and that's what I mean. It was a very different era. Um, so I think you're probably right that many children didn't reach their potential. They still don't, unfortunately. An awful lot of that depends on the understanding and expectation of the teacher and how he or she deals with them. But yeah, I guess you're right. I certainly didn't feel like I could be myself in that setting, whereas in the setting of the Child Development Department's Child Studies Center, where I worked with the kids after school, and in the hospital where I worked with the children individually, I did feel as if I could be myself. And so I guess it wasn't just the children who were restricted.
Yeah. So how did that make you feel when you were teaching art therapy, when you were helping people? Now hopefully the society is turning, we're able to talk about emotions a little bit more, and how that is affecting each other and individuals in society. So we have some of our audiences, college students, high school students, individuals, looking at careers, and some of them may be thinking, where should I go? What should I look for? And so maybe if you can share, how that made you feel and what brought you into art itself. I understand that around the age of 17, there had been a traumatic situation, the experience that you'd went through, and that may have kickstarted art. And so how did that interest as a career maybe start for you?
That's so you've read something about me or by me. It's true. When I was 17, a very close friend died suddenly in an accident. And I was devastated, as were all of our friends. And uh, I remember I was actually an arts and crafts counselor at a camp that summer. Um, and I came home with my musician friend, who ended up being a musicologist and a composer, um, for the funeral. But I was numb. I really couldn't process it. It was so overwhelming and devastating. To lose somebody our own age who had been very healthy. He had been the president of our senior class. He was about to go off to the college that my daughter and my grandson ended up going to, Swarthmore. He had a lot of promise. It was just awful. So, how to process that? Um, when we got back to camp, I remember that we had a day off, and my friend and I, went to the woods. The camp was in the woods, as many summer camps are. Um, and she took her notation book where she composed some music, and I decided I was going to do a painting. And I didn't have any idea what it was going to be, and it ended up actually, no doubt, stimulated by being with her, of somebody at the piano playing. But what I do know, and I didn't think of it as therapy at the time, is that I felt so much better when it was finished. It's as if I couldn't talk about it in words. I couldn't process the trauma in words, but I could by painting. I had always done art and been interested and wanted to be an artist, and from the time I was very little, but it hadn't been such a personally profound experience until that moment. So yeah, that probably, you know, I had never heard the term art therapy until I was in graduate school studying to be a teacher. So um, it took a while to put those things together. Uh, but you're right. And then there were other times in my life, have been other times when my own art has been very powerful. You ask about the gratifications of helping people change are hard to put into words. Really, truly. I've written a lot of books, it's true, but I think one reason I started making films was to show people, because like it's so hard to describe what is essentially a nonverbal experience in words. it's it loses too much in translation. So but seeing people change, seeing a little girl who couldn't sit still, who was constantly going around and flapping her hands and being agitated and saying things that people couldn't understand, seeing her calm down and work at the easel and tell people things about her inner world that nobody knew because she didn't have the words to say them. That was astonishing. Um, so yeah, I think being the agent of really transformation, and also the challenges. It was challenging. Every child was different, um, and I had to, as I said, feel my way. But that was exciting to me. I wasn't following a script or a lesson plan. I was following what was happening with the child,
Yeah.
and it was very moving.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's powerful. I'm wondering if so with athletics, it's competition. Somebody wins, somebody loses, somebody's record improves, somebody's record goes down by a loss. I'm wondering if now what you know, do you have to be a competitive not only a competitive person, but somebody that's like, okay, at the end of the day, what I produce has to be a world-class art piece versus, as you mentioned, if an individual is able to calm down, express themselves, whatever that looks like, it might not be perfect, and it doesn't have to be. Can you maybe just walk through that process of having to be competitive in some areas, and Justin's not doing good in this, so he's got to try something else. Can you maybe just walk through that process a little bit for us?
Oh, I think the one of the real virtues of the arts, especially visual art, and in the context of art therapy, there is no right or wrong. There really isn't. I mean, you can't if you're trying to compete by taking a test, there's no wrong answer and no right answer. And also, each person's work is so individual and unique, and that is really special. Um, in other words, if you have a group of people, you give them the same materials to play with, which I often used to do in workshops, just to play around with, say, colored pipe cleaners or something and see what happens. That kind of open-ended invitation, or colored plasticine, which is an oil-based clay. Everybody's is different, really different. So in a way, it almost negates competition. Sure, people will look around probably and think, oh, hers looks better than mine, or mine looks better than his. I think people are naturally compare themselves to other people. But in a funny sort of way, because there's no right or wrong, um, the only person you need to compare yourself with in art is yourself. And that's the case in therapy too, that whatever is troubling somebody when they start out, um, that's their baseline. And then whatever happens, hopefully, helpfully, um, and they feel better in one area or another, uh, they feel good. So they're not competing with anybody except themselves in a funny sort of way. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I'm glad you went into that detail, because that's helpful, and that's exactly how I felt and how I feel that I'm working on a piece, and whatever the outcome is, it is what it is, but it's that feeling inside. How am I feeling? Did that 20 minutes or 5 minutes make me feel less stress, less anxiety, or more? And to have it feel, and my experience and many others, had to have less anxiety and be able to just express themselves, whatever that looks like. So that's helpful, and I'm glad you went into the detail. Now, when we talk about films, I think that kind of does go hand in hand from the creative sense, the visual person, to see somebody doing something versus maybe just the radio of just listening to somebody speak and talk about something, or pages in a book. Well, those are helpful. When you do work on creative pieces, films, when you were asked by Fred to be in front of the camera on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, was that a natural progression for you, where the camera wasn't, it was the camera, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, it's the camera. It was just more, okay, this is what I like to do, and this is going to help me express what I'm doing to the audience, and the camera is just there to follow that?
Well, I was on Fred's program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, between 1966 and 1969. So the cameras in those days were huge, massive. They had to roll them in, and the mics were overhead.
Okay.
And in fact, one of my funny memories from doing the show is that the person who, I was too vain to wear my glasses, but it was a very large space. And at the far end of this very large space, it was the entire basement of a building where the original QED studio was. Somebody would hold up my segment wasn't scripted. It was ad-libbed. So when it was almost time to wind up, he would hold up a sign saying, 3 3 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever. And since I couldn't see it, Fred would kick me under the table, so I knew it was almost time to. I said, "Oh, Mr. Rogers, I need to go." So actually, I didn't want to do it, to be honest with you. I resisted it. We worked together, as I say, at this place where they were studying child development. That's where he learned a lot about how children really are and think and feel. And I would observe him through a one-way observation mirror. He would come and watch me work. And when I was leaving to have my third child, he said, "By the way, I'm going to be doing a television program. I'd like you to come on and be an art lady." And I said, "Oh, don't be silly. I'm not a performer." And he said, "That's why I want you, because you're not a performer." So he wanted, at that point, somebody real and natural. So that was a relief. But I said, "I'll be nursing this new baby. I won't be able to. I'm going to take a leave of absence from the place we worked." And he said, "Oh, that's no problem. Just the tapings are only 3 hours long, and you can nurse the baby before and after." So, and I really did keep saying no, and then I get a whole bunch of scripts in the mail. So I called him up and I said, "Fred, you're not hearing me." And he said, "Look, I want you just to try it. Just try it." And what he asked me to do was interesting. He would send me the script, which had a theme usually, in the neighborhood of make-believe segment and the at-home segment, which was before and after the neighborhood segment, as you may remember. And I would be part of the at-home segment usually once I went to the neighborhood. But there would be a theme. And I was asked to think about what children between, I think he figured 3 and 7, he thought was his audience, what children between 3 and 7 could do with inexpensive art materials related to that theme. And so I would have my kids and the neighborhood kids come into my kitchen or backyard, and they would do art on the theme, whatever it was. And then I would bring it in and show him, and he would ask questions about how old was the artist and what he or she say. And then he would say, "Well, why don't we do something together?" And he would invite me to join him in an art activity. So in a way, we were subtly modeling how to talk about children's art, how to think about it, but also how to be playful and creative and really it was playing, whatever the theme was. We never planned anything in advance. It really was spontaneous. So it was fun. And after the first try, I said, "Okay, I see what you mean. It is sort of fun." And he's the person who actually got me to make my first film, which was about multiply disabled blind children. And I was working with these kids at the School for the Blind, and I said, "Nobody's ever going to believe me when I tell them how creative they are, because these kids were not like the normal blind children. They had other disabilities, many others." And in fact, the people at the school warned me that they wouldn't be able to do anything, and of course they were. And he said, "Well, you have to make a film. You just have to." And I said, "I don't know anything about filmmaking." And he said, "Well, you must know someone with a camera." So I called up the guy at Children's Hospital who had been making slides so I could give talks on art therapy, slides of artwork. And he said, "Oh, great. We just bought a 16mm camera. We could only do black and white, and it doesn't have sound, but we'd be thrilled to go there." So they came over. I got a little bit of money from my father, pay for developing the film, and that was my first film. And it was quite dramatic when I showed it at a conference, that even though I'd written an article about that program, seeing the kids, hearing the kids actually be creative, it was something you couldn't put into words. So he started me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience with us. For the individuals looking at careers, or maybe they're in their career and they've done things one way, maybe I don't know, say one way their whole life, or they were taught one way or one thing about maybe 5 topics. They've only done one, and when they're asked to reach outside that one thing, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. It's uncomfortable. Can you maybe speak to how you were taking your experience teaching art and doing that and showcasing and expressing that in a different way when you move to film versus just the classroom or just the conference you're speaking at, and how important that is to maybe try new things?
Well, there's a lot of questions embedded in your question.
Pick one.
I think the first one I'd like to tackle
Yeah.
is one that I think has to do with what do you do to help somebody to be creative so that they, even if they feel like most adults and adolescents even feel, oh, I can't do that, I'm not good in art, it's threatening. Um, Part of it is explaining how it will help you to help them, if they can try this other way of expressing themselves, but also it's creating an atmosphere which is partly physical and partly psychological, and creating a space where people feel comfortable trying things out. And, again, that's a hard thing to do. People find different ways depending on their personalities, and I think each therapist has to find their own way of working. I know that I worked with many, many different kinds of people over my career. I worked first in a clinic, then in a psychiatric hospital, and then later in private practice, and seeing people from children to um, elders, which I am now, but I wasn't then. Anyway, and seeing people in school settings, hospital settings, rehab. But the point is, the way I was a different person, I think, or I used different parts of myself in relating to each of these people. And I think the challenge of helping someone feel comfortable, which is really what you're getting at, expressing themselves, is to, this is an awkward way to put it, but to tune in to who they are and what do they want? What are they struggling with? Why are they there? And you're too young to remember when you had to find radio stations on the dial by moving the dial around until you tuned into the right frequency. I don't know that, I think there's no digital analog to that because with digital you connect automatically, but when it was analog, you had to find the frequency. And in a funny sort of way, when you work with people, you have to sort of find the frequency, whether it's an individual or a group or even a setting. So as I say, the other thing that really is important in what you were asking is expectations. I started programs in a lot of places for people with disabilities, blind, deaf, cognitively impaired, and so forth. And what I found was that the expectations were so low on the part of the people who were actually working with them at the time, when they would invite me in to do a pilot program, like at a place then in '67 called the Home for Crippled Children. It is now the Children's Institute. But it was mostly residential, and they had about 200 kids, and they presented me with a list of 10 names for the pilot art program. And I said, 10 out of 200?
Right, yeah.
And they said, oh, and they had a long list of reasons why these other kids wouldn't be able to participate, both physical and mental. And I said, well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to really just assess each child and see what's possible. And you won't be surprised that they were all able to participate. It was a matter of making adaptations so that they could do so. So if they weren't able to use their hands to hold a brush, you could put it in the mouth or the feet and so on. If they couldn't get to the art room, you could have somebody travel around and work at the bedside. So again, it's a sort of a creative challenge, or creative thinking challenge, but not really that hard. It's common sense, uh, making an adaptation so that it's possible for somebody who can or cannot do something to do it.
Right.
Um, and
I,
then, and then uh, pardon me for going on so long, but I think if you are convinced that everybody is creative, and I really am, I don't know that you can teach that, but I really truly believe it. Um, then they get that message. And the expectation of the adult working with whoever, um, a person of any age, it has a powerful impact on what they're able to do.
yeah, it really does. And the approach and experience you just shared, I think is powerful because, well, maybe the therapy in one person's eye should be catered towards 10 students. In your eyes, it was, let's see where everybody's at, because everybody's going to have some ability to do art. And isn't that what we should really be we should be doing? And so when programs now at schools, they're cutting programs and moving things around, sometimes the arts is one of the programs that goes, unfortunately. Can you speak to just the importance of it? We've talked about it a lot, but for each individual, not just like, okay, well, this is only going to affect 10% of our students, so they can go elsewhere. That type of think versus why don't we include everybody and let them decide at the next level if that's something that is interesting to them, and then if there's a therapeutic need, then you're able to have that, as you called, that baseline already.
There's no question that the arts have often been the first to go when budgets need to be cut because they're thought of as frills, not necessary, not the core of learning. And however, fortunately, as you mentioned before, people are getting more comfortable with the idea of mental health and people talking about psychological problems, feelings, fears, and so forth, uh, talking about going to see therapists, counselors, coaches, whatever they call them. It's become more acceptable. And during, I would say, the last 10 years, actually, um, there's been a growing awareness among non-art therapists, but people in neuropsych, for example, neuropsychology, that not only creating and doing, but even viewing or in music, attending, being a, a spectator at a dance or a musical performance is also therapeutic in very real sense. And they've started to measure some of those effects. Um, Again, because of the advances in neurological imaging, we can actually now demonstrate that what people in the creative arts therapies have observed all along actually happens. People really do not only feel better, they get better. They need fewer medications, for example, fewer doctor's visits. I mean, there's a whole bunch of studies, and the World Health Organization just adopted a large effort to include all of the arts in their, I forget what the name of it is, but um, I know that it's happening in many parts of the world. It isn't just the United States. Veterans Administration is catching on. So slowly but surely, people are beginning to recognize that the arts are not only good for fostering creativity, but they actually help people feel more confident, learn creative problem solving, and do better in sort of other academic areas. In other words, math, English, social studies can be enhanced when the arts, and we're beginning to be able to demonstrate that. So hopefully that will, I don't know what the statistics are right now, but I do know there's more community arts activity around the country. and that's good. Unfortunately, the arts are very helpful when people have traumas, and there's a lot of trauma in our world, as you know. So the arts therapies have been growing, I think, in part because they meet a need. Because again, when people are traumatized, even if they're normally quite articulate, they don't have words to deal with what happened.
Yeah. So to take a tangential look at books. So one of the areas that you have dedicated time is writing and being an author. Uh, can you maybe walk through not so much the process of the writing, but what you were looking to get out? Was it to to reach more people, which I would think at some level, to expand your breadth of what you're able to do, of being able to to do films, to do talks, to do lectures, and then to be able to put that in the book form, which many books don't have as many visual appealing pictures in it as my 4-year-old daughter would say. Is like, this isn't a book. This doesn't have any pictures in it. So what is this? How am I supposed to go about it? And I know she's learning, but maybe just your outlook of when that those projects came about.
Well, to be honest, I did not start out intending to write, but very early, I gave a talk somewhere. Oh, I think it was actually the first art therapy conference, the very first of the American Art Therapy Association, which is the national professional association, was held in 1970. And I was working at a child guidance center and was doing work with mothers and children in a joint group where they met jointly occasionally and then separately and jointly. A social worker met with the mothers, I met with the kids, and then we would get together periodically with everybody and then process it. So it was a different sort of format, and I decided I would present something about that work. And the editor of the then only journal in art therapy came up to me after the talk and said, "I'd like to publish that. Do you have it in writing?" And
Okay.
I had just written some notes and sort of ad-lib. I said, "Well, I guess I could put it, I could type it out because this was the age of the typewriter. There were no computers then." And she said, "Yes, I'd really like that." And it was called the Bulletin of Art Therapy. And so I did write up. We had a group in the clinic, and I was doing groups with a similar format in the community at nursery schools and churches and things like that. And then, having written it out and Eleanor Ullman published it, I heard the next year from a colleague who was working in Los Angeles in a similar child guidance center. She said, "Oh, I've tried that method with my patients here in Los Angeles, and it really works well." And I thought, "Oh, okay, so that's the value of writing, is you can share ideas in a way that you can't. I mean, how many places can you give a talk, you know? At least more people were reading the journal at that point, or the Bulletin of Art Therapy. So that's actually what got me started, was the idea that writing was a way of sharing and inspiring others. And I guess that's true for film too. I mean, it's a way of telling. And I really do feel that I was very lucky to find the field of art therapy. It just suited me in a way that the teaching hadn't. And so I think there's a missionary component, actually. Certainly, my recent work with expressive media has been creating a film library with lots of films. Not, I haven't made them all by any means, made by other people, also showing their work, showing how people actually interact during art therapy, because it's hard for students to see that nowadays, to observe. Anyway, so it is almost evangelical because I really believe in it. It's so remarkably helpful.
Yeah, and I think this talks about another issue is, well, not an issue, but a topic that treating a child in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania versus treating a child in Los Angeles, California, it's universal. The arts. It's not a niche or only a certain geography. I would think that that was helpful, as you mentioned when you were talking with your colleague at that point, that okay, the writings are helping broaden that reach, but then getting that validation that okay, it's working on all the way on the other coast next to the Pacific Ocean, that this has that universal approach, that world approach, and maybe that's led to some of your work overseas and being able to travel and being in demand over the years.
I enjoy traveling. I did. I can't travel much anymore because I have various disabilities at this point myself. But um, it's traveling to other cultures, you really do learn a tremendous amount. And I should also add that you learn more from your patients, clients, than from any books or films, in my opinion. That's where the real learning. But I love travel. I found it fascinating to learn. Obviously, I was interested in the visual arts in any culture, but also I do love music and dance and drama. So it's been I've been very lucky to have been able to teach in, I guess, every continent. And my grandchildren recently said, "How many countries have you been to, Nana?" And I said, "I never counted."
Mhm.
So we were sitting around a dinner table, and they started to count, and it was 50. So
Wow.
even I didn't realize it was that many. I mean, it's over a number of years,
Mhm.
but but so it was fun, interesting, enriching for me. And I think that's the other thing about this work, that it really it's not only it's satisfying, gratifying, um, and and you learn so much. You learn a lot about yourself too.
And I can concur, being an instructor to marketing students at Walsh University, that I learn a lot from them as students. That there's only so much maybe a textbook can cover, but by sharing my life experiences, that opens them up to share their life experiences or things that they're going through at the time. And I think just having that mindset that we can always learn, no matter what age, whether you're an instructor teaching and the students, I'm teaching the students, while we are, in the sense, the instructor, and we're going to be grading and evaluating their work, we're also human beings. So we have that element that I think art really ties together so much, is that communication, that it can be through film, through the spoken word, through pictures, through sounds. And I know there may be other areas, other industries that do that as well, but I think that art is one of the most powerful languages or areas that touches every aspect. If we're in the car, we can turn on the radio, or if we're in the back seat, a movie or a seminar, or be in a classroom, and all those types of things. All those are pieces of art. I think maybe some people, they get restricted based off of maybe what they hear. That's might be selective. But once, I think, if they would hear and say, like, oh wow, all these aspects are art, kind of like when I came to my senses, to understand that, okay, music and playing an instrument, that is a form of art. And then also being able to do the adult coloring books and the mandalas and all those things, of saying, okay, well, I do like that. I don't know why, but it makes me feel good, makes my brain a little bit less stressed, and so maybe that extra 1% of not being stressed does, to your point, help do other tasks. And I think there's so much that can be said about the overstimulated mind and the overstimulated brain, especially now, and to have an ability to free up a little bit of that, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, I agree with you that right now we're living in a hyper stimulating world, and especially not this kind of a internet interaction, but what normally transpires on the internet with people bouncing from one app to another, one social media platform to another. Communication is fragmented, and there's one of the arts, I think, are one of the few ways that you can get into an altered state of consciousness, which is not what happens when you're playing on the computer. That's a different kind of addiction when you're in Facebook or whatever, clicking on things. But when you start painting or listening to music, you really do get into an altered state, which I believe is, people talk about meditation. The arts are very old.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings have used all art forms all the way back, as far as we know, at least in recorded history, and some history recorded on cave walls. So there's evidence for how important the arts are to human beings, and many cultures value them more than ours. But I think we're beginning to get there, or to renew that.
So what keeps you sharp? Because you have a ton of knowledge. I wish I had the memory that you have at 41. What could what keeps you sharp? Is it the different forms of art? Is it a combination of things? You don't have to get into huge detail, but to be able to share things that happen 40, 50, 60 years, that in itself, without looking at the why, that's powerful in a sense. And I'm just curious. So maybe some things that maybe I can do my daughter already thinks I'm old. She's like, you have a 4 in your age, but it's like, but I also have a 1 after it. You have just a 4 in your age. So yeah.
I'd say, yeah, keep playing that guitar. Mm-hmm. And you said you were doing some artwork. Was it sculpting, painting, drawing?
More coloring with the colored pencils, yeah.
In the adult coloring books, mm-hmm. which has been shown to be extremely relaxing. Well, we were talking about how hyper our era is. You need to relax, and I would say the other thing we need that maybe helps is getting out in nature. I think that's really important. I think one of the problems with our society is that we've lost touch in most areas with the natural world. And, art, clay comes from the ground. You dig it out of the ground. The pigments for paint come from different plants. The arts wouldn't be possible without the natural world. And it's the natural world that, at least until recently, has inspired most artwork over the ages. So, but I think there's something very powerful about the beauty of the natural world, which I find personally very soothing. A sunset is almost as good as a symphony. It's a different kind of symphony, but
yeah, so. I remember when my parents they came back from Hawaii, and they mentioned just the sights and the cliffs and looking at the sunsets and the sunrises, saying this is the closest the world has to heaven. They felt close and connected. And when I went with my wife when we got married on our honeymoon, I felt much the same. And not that it has to be Hawaii, but just that getting out in nature and looking at things, and somebody doesn't have to travel thousands of miles to see that. They can go to their local park. They can sit on their deck and see the stars at night, or the sun, or the moon.
Yeah, I'd forgotten this, but once I was teaching a course and I had to give the kids an exam at the end, and I was in Vermont, in a beautiful part of Vermont. Um, and they said, okay, you've asked us a lot of questions. Now, can we ask you a question? I said, oh, sure, go ahead. They said, who's your favorite artist? And I said, oh my gosh, I like so many artists. I'm running through all the names I had. I don't have a favorite. And then I looked around and I said, no, actually, I do have one, Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I do believe that.
Wow. So expressive media, that is, and has been a passion of yours. How did you decide that you wanted to form, be part of the organization and continue, sharing, through the arts, the forms of art?
I mentioned that I worked in a clinic, I worked at a psychiatric hospital, and finally decided my friend, who's a drama therapist, and I, who worked together on many things, had made films. We had both made films and had made films together. We decided we wanted to leave the hospital and do full-time private practice because we were able to start that as faculty, and that was so satisfying. And the hospital was getting more and more restrictive in its rules and regulations, and I wasn't very good at administration. I didn't like that part of the job. So we had made a bunch of films, and we had shot some videotapes of us doing art and drama therapy, and we were told we couldn't have, they couldn't give them to us unless we formed a nonprofit. So overnight we formed something called Expressive Media, so we could, because our friends and colleagues were borrowing these films already. They were 16 millimeter films. Later we had them converted to VHS tapes and then DVDs. So that's how it started, out of necessity, because we wanted people to be able to learn from the teaching films we had made. And so, and then it grew like, as things do. And when I made the film you mentioned, Art Therapy Has Many Faces, or the Universal Language for Healing, which is about art around the world, I asked for contributions from lots of people. And I saw some really beautiful, wonderful films that were gonna, they get lost after a while, especially educational films. They don't hang around very long. And I thought it's a shame other people could learn from these. So that's when I got the idea of a film library, a streaming film library. So that's what we're doing right now, and hopefully that will be successful and will help to train a lot of people and inspire.
Yeah. And I can't think of another word. You are a true humanitarian, somebody that likes, at their core, likes to help people. I think that is a good way. That everything we've touched on is at the core of you're trying to help somebody. You're trying to help somebody feel better, do something they might not have tried, and this even starting expressive media out of a necessity. I think that still rings true, that you want to help people, you want to help have content that's available, it's shareable, and I just want to thank you for your time, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure and treat to see you, speak with you, listen to you, and we just hope you have continued success and enjoy what you like to do, and it's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, and I wish you all the success in the world. It's been fun.
Thank you. I'm going to close out with a little bit at the end of on a teleprompter, and then if you can smile for a couple of pictures on the camera.
Should I look at the green light on my computer?
Yeah. So I'll finish this up, and then we'll do the pictures. So thank you also to our audience, our viewers, our listeners, our readers. for joining and tuning into this episode of the Voices for Voices podcast, and a super special guest today, Dr. Judy Rubin, for spending a lot of her time with us today. It's been an absolute treat and pleasure, and I hope you feel the same. So until next time, I am Justin Allen Hayes. Have a great day and be a voice for you or somebody in need.